So we saw this today with Venezuelans and the ending of TPS for them, saying that they may or may not do it through a secret memo that hasn't been released to lawyers yet, saying, Biden extended it too early. We might stop it in April. We might stop it in September. We're talking about 600,000 individuals who have work authorization in this country who are currently working, right? That you're going to take away from these companies. I think that's the other thing that's important to talk about. These aren't people who are just hanging out. These are people who have a work status in the country. This unsophisticated way of announcing a policy sort of makes it confusing to the employer to be able to decide if someone has work authorization or not, but also to the individual to know if they're here in the country with status or not. And so this sort of paroling thing is just a way we sort of enter people into the country. It's been used for many years. It's exactly what DACA is, except DACA codified it a way of saying these are the regulations to address having that DACA status.
Welcome to Trailblaze. This is the show where we talk about the direction America is headed, the ideas, the people that are changing what America is and what it's becoming. I'm Nayyera.
Hi, I'm Jamal Simmons. Welcome to Trailblaze. Good to be with you again, Nayyera.
We are joined today by Allen Orr, somebody I've learned a lot from over the years and trying to understand what's happening with immigration law. Allen is currently head of the immigration section for the National Bar Association. He's past president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. He runs his own immigration law firm. So he touches the cases. He deals with the policy, and Lord knows a lot of that has changed in the last 10 days or so. So we invited Allen on to help us understand exactly what is going on with immigration today. Allen, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Allen, I wanted to kick off with something a bit broader that deals with how the United States and other countries are relating to each other. Specifically, these 3 executive orders that came out in the flurry of everything else, but they now allow for a very new power, a new military power for the United States. So there's the federalization of National Guard, which means National Guard, the state militias can be sent to the border, U.S. military being sent to the border, and the declaring of gangs as terrorist organizations. Folks might remember after 9/11, the United States, the commander-in-chief has the authority essentially to go to war in order to go after a terrorist organization or any of the nations that support a terrorist organization. Allen, are we looking at U.S. military being used in Latin America because of immigration?
Well, I think in some levels we are, but I think it's more of a framing of the broader picture of what immigration is. And I think we need to have a bigger, broad spectrum about how immigration became a party issue for just the Democrats, and then how immigration itself became one of invasion and criminals. Because if we look back to Ronald Reagan, and the concept was a little bit more balanced of saying there are equities for the holes in our law that allow people to be in this country for a long time, that they could sort of right size up and gain some status here. Even through the Bushes, we saw a conversation of humanity with regards to immigration law hasn't been reformed. We have these shortcomings. Sure, some people should be removed, but everybody isn't guilty. Then we saw the rise of Trump in his first administration, in which he came down the elevator saying they're all criminals and that it's an invasion. Then we had the whole Biden year, and the Democrats couldn't have a conversation about immigration. They didn't know how to frame it. They didn't know what the concepts were. They couldn't get a coalition to sort of build to say, this is what we think about immigration, and this is the party platform going forward. And yes, we're going to get rid of, and he was getting rid of people. It just wasn't publicized in the right way, because we sued Biden on his asylum policies. And then Trump came back to office on the concept of you're being invaded and we need the military to protect us. So I think it's less of an issue necessarily about going to the other countries, but more of an issue of scaring people within our country and saying, this is a big concern to you because now you're being invaded. And that's what the Trump administration has done to immigration. He's made this zero-sum game about name and numbers. I mean, there's no population problem in this country. We don't have a birth control or anything like that. So, there's too many of them here. He's known that they've been here since his last administration. And now, other than finding a way to fix it, he's saying, I'm going to have the military remove it. And what's important for me to continue to say is that those are high costs. A plane to remove 80 people using a military flight is, $800,000. Using an ICE flight, wow, it's $8,000. So those costs are just the variants that go on. So it's more of a power grab to say, I'm protecting you, to have this military grab within the country.
It's a 10 times? So 8,000 if it's a commercial flight run by ICE, 800,000 if it's a military plane.
100 times. Yeah, 100 times.
I can't do math.
That's okay, you got it.
And the concept is, as we saw this weekend, what Colombia said was, first, don't bring your military plane to my airport, because that just looks weird. But two, if you've been inside a military plane, it's not set up for commercial flight. It's not
Yeah.
safe. You're along the harbor of a hull. There's no safety devices in it. So it's just, you're not going to treat my citizens that way.
Yeah, I was struck by the harnessing of people to chains, right? Like they're chained around the waist and around the hands, as if I don't know, maybe some of these people were really, really bad criminals. It doesn't seem like they all were. A lot of this, and you tell me, the lawyer, a lot of this reminds me of, I saw that there was a lawmaker in Mississippi who said that he wanted to reinstate bounty hunter programs, right? So individual citizens can go and find people who were here illegally. A lot of this just feels like the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act, right? It just feels like we're just going to round up people because they look like they might be bad, and then haul them in. I've got a friend named Lisa who's got on her wall a framed copy of her great great grandfather's emancipation papers, and he had to carry them around to prove to people that he wasn't a slave. In the 1800s, to prove to people that he wasn't a slave. It just all feels very familiar. I mean, you tell me. You're the lawyer here who focuses.
I think it is. It does feel familiar to me as well, being a product of the South, sort of growing up in Georgia and studying these histories. But I think the way we remove people has always been this way, sort of this shackling of individuals. So that is not new. The way it was shown, the production of it came off in that way, and sort of the shame that's involved with individuals who had no other issue other than coming in the country undocumented and had been here for years and may have some equity arguments. Part of what we need to go back to in every conversation with immigration is basic civics. And one of the things we should look at is the Constitution and who has the power over immigration. And it's not the president, it's Congress. So as we continue to talk about these executive orders in immigration, we should also know that there's no space for that unless it's legislated through Congress. We have seen Congress push through the Lincoln-Raleigh Act, which I think has many flaws in it, but that's the way bills happen in our country. And it may be challenged against its constitutionality for giving these local attorney generals power over federal law. But the issue here is we're now seeing a president act so extreme by making executive orders that are poorly written, poorly thought out, and not linked to the regulations, because the people who are doing it are novice in immigration. They have a concept of what they want to do, but they don't know how to turn all the levers. And because the levers have been set up for years in such a way that we're doing patchy immigration, they can't fix everything. For example, he gave people the ability to end parole for individuals through one of the Biden programs. Well, they're not undocumented if they're already into the country parole. So sort of ending it after someone's already paroled in is a false way to sort of address the status. And it really doesn't clarify what the issue is. So we have all of these holes. Yes.
That idea of parole, right? Parole for somebody who is undocumented now means they have a legal status in the country of sorts?
Absolutely. So let's talk about legal status, because I think it's important that as we sort of define who's undocumented and who's documented, anyone who presented themselves at the southern border through the CBP-1 app under the Biden administration, had an appointment, got to come into the country, had a notice to appear, was allowed in because they feel like they had an asylum claim, they're not undocumented. There's a document that follows them. They don't have a status, but they're documented. And that's how we're able to sort of track them. So this concept of who's undocumented, if someone has a notice to appear, they're not undocumented. If someone has an asylum claim, they're not undocumented. If someone was paroled into this country, they're also not undocumented because they were yes.
In Trump MAGA language, those people, even though there is a way to track them, they have documents, they still want to call them illegals.
Right.
That's what they've changed.
Well, so we saw this today with Venezuelans and the ending of TPS for them, saying that they may or may not do it through a secret memo that hasn't been released to lawyers yet, saying, Biden extended it too early. We might stop it in April. We might stop it in September. We're talking about 600,000 individuals who have work authorization in this country who are currently working, right? That you're going to take away from these companies. I think that's the other thing that's important to talk about. These aren't people who are just hanging out. These are people who have a work status in the country. This unsophisticated way of announcing a policy sort of makes it confusing to the employer to be able to decide if someone has work authorization or not, but also to the individual to know if they're here in the country with status or not. And so this sort of paroling thing is just a way we sort of enter people into the country. It's been used for many years. It's exactly what DACA is, except DACA codified it a way of saying these are the regulations to address having that DACA status.
What the broad strokes of what he's done in the last week and a half? What are they?
Within his power, outside of his power, because I think that's what's important to really define.
Yeah, let's talk about what's outside of his power and really the aggressiveness of, because one thing is about what's legal, and the other thing, as we talked about with the military flights, is about kind of the othering of this population that will, let's just call it, give for a permission structure to do more extreme things in order to pursue people who are here without status or without documentation.
So this deputizing of every military force in the United States to go after immigrants is what he's done legally within the last couple of weeks. Sort of saying everybody from the head of national security all the way down to the local Barney Five can carry out immigration law. And in that conversation about sanctuary cities and what it means is there's no given definition of what a sanctuary city is. And what a sanctuary city basically says is under the Constitution, immigration is enforced at a federal level, not at a state level. We don't have the power to do it, so we're not doing your job. That's what that means. It doesn't mean that they're not interested in carrying out or helping the government, and it's not criminals. If ICE is only deporting people that local Barney Fives collected, then are they really doing national security? Because if Barney Five can get them, then they should have been able to remove them at an earlier level. That's number one. Number two, he did a federal case to close down the border. We had recently sued the Biden administration saying there has to be a way for immigrants to file for asylum because asylum is in the regulations under Congress. And in order to end that, Congress needs to change the rule. Congress did not change the rule. Biden administration created CBP One app to have a sort of orderly way for people to come through. Trump ended that policy. So basically he ended asylum at the southern border, and the ACLU filed, and there was a hearing about that. And we don't know what the final resolve on that case is just yet, but it will be coming to a front pretty soon to figure out if that's okay, because you can't just end a federal regulation by fiat of the pen. In addition to that, he sort of authorized all of this money spending, which I don't know where the money's coming from, to do these deportation acts. And by doing that, he expanded the ability to sort of remove people who've been in the country for less than 2 years rapidly. So if you can't prove, if you're caught in the interior and you've been here for less than 2 years and you can't prove that you've been here for 2 years, they can move you through a quicker system, expedited removal, rather than going through the asylum system, which is backed up for 3 to 8 years. Part of the conversation that is lost right now is in January, we had 41,000 beds for detention. 39,000 of those beds were filled. So if they're doing 1,000 people a day, what are they doing with these individuals? A story came out today that they were putting them in military facilities. Well, that doesn't sound like that's helping military readiness and is a good use of those facilities, because detention is another social welfare system where you're sort of feeding them, got to take care of them. You're responsible for them for human rights violations. You're responsible to make sure your officers are not sort of invading them. The standard just rises so high. Are there children there? So it's not the best financial way to sort of manage these capabilities. And he doesn't have the money to expand it any other way. Tom Holman, who is running this operation, said, I need 100,000 beds. Well, there's no purse for that 100,000 beds, which may be something that they try to address in the next bill that comes through Congress, this sort of omnibus bill, to sort of throw some funding in to sort of get behind those things. Those are in sort of his policy discretions. So this ability, when he came into office last time, he started with the travel ban. Inartful, not precise. And this time he's starting with TPS. Unartful, not precise. Sued him last time. He wasn't able to end it. Basically, the court said these people have an understanding of what their status should be for a certain period of time. So when their status ends, you can end it. But he didn't win on that. So I don't know where there's been a reflection from Trump 45 to Trump today to say, this is how we're going to fix this system. These are the ways to address this in a sort of a systematic way. In addition to that, the key thing I want people to hear is he's not going after people who are undocumented. He's taking people who are documented and making them undocumented. That's a choice.
Allen, the idea of taking people who had some kind of documentation and making them undocumented so that Dr. Phil and others could show on TV a bunch of brown people being put in handcuffs and being deported, even though they're probably just being moved into a facility. They're not actually leaving the country yet. So much of this is about the public narrative. And you mentioned earlier that Democrats or anybody who is more progressive on immigration lost the narrative. I would also argue that all of the legal logic you are giving, while it will hold up in court, what Trump has done is push that to the side in order to scare people into compliance, in order to allow police and military to go after groups of people, and essentially saying, we'll deal with all the legal obligations later. We'll deal with the money later. We're going to make a big dramatic show of rounding people up because that will make a certain segment of the American population feel good. Something's being done about those folks.
Well, I think part of the story that we should also remember is what they learned before by raiding a meatpacking plant in Mississippi early on. Tom Homan was behind that as well. They only caught maybe 23 people who were undocumented, but it broke down the whole community and the ability of that plant to feed that community and all of the offspring. So people who are working jobs are generally paying rent, paying car notes, shopping places, buying stuff. So all that stuff happened. Children needed to be picked up from school. They were not picked up from school. So there was a horrible media story. And where I feel the mainstream media is failing right now is they're not doing the stories about those 1,000 people that are caught. The ICE is saying these people are criminals. Well, what type of criminals are they? Did they do a shoplifting because they had no clothes? Did they take a can of milk because they needed to feed their baby? I think those are different types of crimes than saying someone who's running a drug cartel. Apparently, they caught one individual in New York City who was involved in it, seemed to be a fairly young individual. Glad that they removed him, but that doesn't mean 1 out of 1,000 is not an impressive number for me. I need to see all of the crimes, all the numbers, and what's happening to them. Otherwise, you're setting up this narrative that you're protecting me from something that doesn't exist.
And who are the people who are watching these folks, right? How do we ensure that they're being treated in a humanitarian fashion? They have any rights that are being preserved? We talked about the fact they may be on military bases, but we don't necessarily know. We don't know if, are they just picking up people who have a status question? We thought at one point they were saying if you're the child of that person and you get picked up, they're going to keep families together, which means you can have American children like in these places. Who is the Red Cross going in to make sure they're okay? How do we know that these people are not, like in cages again and not being taken care of in unsanitary conditions?
We do not know that because we do not know the funding or how they're being removed. And the biggest challenge we have as lawyers is to make sure people know their rights. If you saw Tom Homan sort of speak about Chicago, which did a really good job, the government saying, here are your rights. So a lot of people knew their rights and they weren't talking, they weren't disclosing stuff, they weren't letting people into their homes. And so therefore that sort of curtailed the number of people who were sort of detained there without having some ability to know who the lawyer is. Because that's really, while there are 11 million people in this country, in the American Immigration Lawyers Association, we are 16,000 lawyers. And we don't all do removal cases. So there's not a lawyer for every client and sort of having that right. In addition to that thing, the one thing that I think came specifically from Stephen Miller in the White House is they removed all the legal orientation programs. They removed the Spanish language courses. So generally when someone's detained, they are given a legal orientation to say, here are your rights that you might have and some relief when you get to immigration court. They got rid of it. The Spanish webpage on the white page, they got rid of it.
Well, that tracks. That tracks to me because their interest is not upholding rule of law. The interest is not in making sure every human in America knows their rights. Their interest is there are rights for some and not for others. And very, I think, bluntly, someone like Stephen Miller has said, yes, we're going to go into schools and pull out undocumented children because those are criminal aliens. Right? Just that word change, narrative change, this idea that the three of us are discussing about humanity and rights and watching out for people, that's not their point and that's not their interest. The question I have then is, how far are they going to get away with it?
So that really depends on the American people. And once the stories are sort of told, this is a civil rights moment, right? If we don't see the images and no one sort of looks away and they think everybody's a criminal, then they're going to applaud. They're going to cheer, right? The other thing is that the finances aren't matching, right? Tell me how much it costs to have those people at the border. And how are you going to sustain that for more than 30, 40 days, right? The people who are actually doing those jobs have a Reddit page, and they're already saying, this is beneath me. I didn't join the military to put up barbed wire, the fence, and to sort of detain people. So the question of sustainability of what's going on at the border is one question. Visibility. Why is it that I can't turn on any network and see who these people are that they detain? Where are their hearings? Where are their spaces? When are they getting immigration lawyers? So some of the businesses contact me. I do a lot of work in the workplace compliance, and it is what it is with them, right? But I will say this. Why are the businesses in trouble, right? Why is it the immigrant that's the bad person when people are hiring them and they're doing these jobs to help you and to keep costs low? Why is the immigrant being deported and not the American having to figure out why they can help these immigrants some restitution for them in this situation? So those things don't track for me in this whole story of you're trying to get the criminals, because if you're really trying to get the criminal and the king lord, then it would be the employer that's the problem, not the individuals independently.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I remember, I guess, during the Obama administration, this was one of the focuses that they said they were going to go after some of the employers. I remember there was a huge outcry about how unfair that would be to go after employers when, in fact, anybody who's ever gotten a job in the last, I don't know, I've been working for 30 years, like 40 years, like anybody who's gotten the jobs had to fill out that paperwork. It was the I-9 to prove that you have the right to be able to work in the, work in the country. So if they're not doing their diligence on that, they seem like they're the ones who are also at fault here.
And you know who did a good job with that? Was General Christine Clark. She actually had a fair and balanced sort of record of every month. You saw all of these big restitutions from companies on both sides. Those that were discriminating against Americans, those that were discriminating against immigrants, those that were hiring. You see lawn companies. You can go and look on the webpage, the Justice Department, if it's still there, right? That's one of the things they're sort of doing is this erasure of all these web pages. And you can sort of track every month. She had a settlement with the company with regards to some type of compliance issue in immigration, which was tracking with letting people know. The first time when the Trump administration came in, they did something that was smarter with regard to workforce employment. There's definitely two ways to do this, and I think this is important to know. They sent out audit letters to companies to supply their documentation to one location so they could be sorted. What that does is it lets you do the analytics that are involved in security rather than just doing buckshop and showing up somewhere and maybe you get someone, maybe you don't get someone. You don't get the whole workforce because no whole company is at work on any day. It's cheaper because the burden's on the company to get the documents organized. You can use technology, AI, your computer, any system to sort of sort through and sort of say, does this make sense? Does that make sense? Are these birth dates, whatever? Is this social security number used in different places? And so for me, the question for me for Tom Homan is, well, if you know that exists and that's a way to do this, then why are you showing up at doorsteps? Why is Kristi Noem on the ground with her hair looking beautiful as if she's in a photo shot saying, we caught this criminal today? That doesn't track to me unless you're trying to tell the story that you're these American heroes and I'm saving you for something.
Well, I know we're going to wrap this up soon, but to me, what I notice about this as a communications political person is this really is about legitimizing the dehumanization of people, right? Mm-hmm. Because once a legal alien, right, which is already kind of an othering term, once you tell people these are really bad people and you should do whatever it takes to get rid of these people, you start with the people who maybe do have legitimate reason to get rid of, right? Like they could be in a gang. They could have committed a more serious crime. And if you can treat them in a dehumanized way, then when you start working down the list and now you're just picking up, moms and dads who are working in a meatpacking plant or cleaning a house or doing whatever it is they do, now it's okay. But I'll tell you this. If you see ICE agents running up into elementary and middle schools and grabbing kids out of class, God help the people who do it, because I've seen what moms do. And it's not even about the kid they're taking. Right. If these, excuse me, if young white kids are subjected to seeing their friends hauled out of school by officers of the law, their parents are going to go rip shit. Yep. I have seen it for much lesser things. And I think if they have lost any sense of propriety if they allow that to happen.
That is the case actually in our local schools. So,
well, and just one more point that Jamal made, this super important to everybody who's on this broadcast. If they will do it to them based on the way they look, they will do it to us. There have been American citizens who have been caught up in these raids, and there are recourses for that, and they probably will win if they have the money to get there. But there are laws against detaining U.S. citizens or trying to remove U.S. citizens. It's happened in the past. And in this sort of unorganized method in which they're doing people, in which many Black Americans don't have passports because they couldn't afford them, or even real IDs in those cases, if they live in cities where you just take public transportation, well, I might not pay $50 for something I'm not going to use. Those are real everyday concepts. The way they treat people who look like you is the same way they're willing to treat you. And there have been no removal flights to Ireland.
And this is the thing I get to about how they don't care about what the law says or what the gaps in the law are, right? They just want the bravado. They want the American hero look. So yes, I'm a natural born U.S. citizen. On the one hand, I can run for president, but because of my skin tone, my name, I could easily get picked up if I'm hanging around with a bunch of Latinos in my neighborhood, whether it be at the Costco or even at my kids' elementary school, because we have a majority minority school district. And how many days is it going to take for me to prove that I'm a U.S. citizen? Meanwhile, my kids already see me hauled out in handcuffs. I am keenly aware of that reality, right? That anybody who looks or sounds as somebody not white and male is actually a target by any of these military or CBP officers who decide they want to play American hero for a day.
or
Yeah, and
less.
yeah,
Local security, right? Doesn't have to be CDP. It's going to be the Barney Five. It's going to be the local officer who's going to make that big mistake.
Well, I will tell you though, I'm proud of my local school district because they said we're not going to make this about know your rights and having the undocumented folks or the folks who feel attacked right now be the ones to stand up for themselves. The school district itself is saying, ha ha ha, by the way, don't you dare walk up to our door with some administrative document. It better be a warrant from a judge because until then, we are not allowed to give you any information about any student. That is the law.
Mm-hmm.
So those who are not the ones directly attacked, standing up for what is right, I think that is a key part of the solution.
that's right. We had a very similar notice from our school district as well. But then you look at what's happening in Florida, where the governor has basically said, "Doors open. Come on, do what you got to do."
Mm-hmm.
And so many people, Black, Latino, Afro Latino,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can't actually tell maybe where they're from just by looking at them. We are going to see some really destructive things happen as we navigate through this. So, Alan, I'm going to thank you for being here and helping.
Thank you
One,
for having
helping
me.
us understand, and then two, helping all the folks out there who need help, help them manage.
Jamal, I'm really struck by in our conversation with Allen how patchwork the immigration system has been, how obvious it has been that Congress had needed to step in. The last time we had immigration reform was under Reagan. That was also the highest number of asylum and refugee folks we've had. It's steadily declined since then, yet nothing's been done on that front. So now we just have a bunch of wannabe heroes, soldiers going after kids. And then the idea that just catching as many people as you can and sorting it out later, not only does that impact our humanity, but we're seeing stories coming out of California where the threat of that is now making farm workers not show up. California is where we get our food. Texas is where we get our food. If
Yeah,
Trump was elected on the price of eggs, let me tell you, folks, you take away those workers, we are looking at some real sticker shock in a couple of months.
and notice today the Federal Reserve refused to cut the interest rates again because all of these policies are inflationary, right? When you remove workers from the workforce, you're going to drive up the cost of labor, which is not necessarily bad to drive up the cost of labor, but you're going to drive it up, which means you're going to drive up the cost of products, as well as these possible tariffs that could happen on some of our allies, which, by the way, why are we always fighting with our allies? Fighting with Canada and Mexico? Like, call me when this dude wants to fight somebody who actually, can do us harm. But anyway, that's a Twitter thug problem. I am struck by what Alan said, because it's the more you learn about this, the more you witness it, the more it becomes clear this isn't actually about a policy to achieve any broader goal. This is really about cleansing. It's really about getting getting as many brown people out, because there are people who feel threatened by the changing culture of America. And Trump says he's going to stop that, and he's going to go after removing these people. And so these are the ones who he can kind of other about whatever their legal status is. But make no mistake, once this ball starts rolling down the hill, it's not just going to stop at people who have broken the law in some way or broken immigration law. It will then move to people who've broken other laws, and then it will move to people who live with people who broke laws. I mean, we remember this
I think that's even
from the drug controversies in the 1980s and 90s, where it wasn't just the people who were committing drugs. If you had a person who were selling drugs in your house, you could lose your house or your car because you let somebody who sold drugs live in your house. This
Jamal,
is a
I don't even
dangerous
think it's going to take that
line.
long because
Yeah,
they've learned so many lessons. I think that whole idea of just rounding up people and they'll figure it out later. So you
right.
just happen to be brown and next to somebody else who may be undocumented. Good luck, right?
Yeah,
They have given themselves the authority to do that, and I guess it's technically the answer is, well, this is what America asked for and this is what's going to get. But I will say this: Americans did not necessarily ask for closing of restaurants, not having the ability to afford food prices because food isn't being produced anymore, right? The employer side of this is entirely being ignored. The demand side of immigrant work is being ignored in favor of this identity argument. And my going theory is that Elon Musk thinks he can just create a bunch of AI, tech bots that'll take care of all of this work that suddenly isn't going to be done.
yeah. Here's the thing, for everybody who looks at the AI problem, AI is really coming after my job and yours, Nayyera. It's not coming after people who are serving you in restaurants. We have yet to find robots who can decide whether or not you need more cream in your coffee and to get it to you in an efficient way, right? So that's not really what's going to happen. But what will happen is what you said in the beginning. Absolutely, there won't be people who are helping to make these businesses run. There won't be people who are making sure we have food on our table. There won't be people who are, working at the stores that we need. And then when those people don't come, you have to pay more to get American citizens to do it, which means everything will cost more, which means you're driving up inflation, which means you're, as Allen said, you're destroying neighborhoods and the economy of neighborhoods and families and what's happening with kids whose relatives are going disappearing. And I was really touched by seeing some of these stories about how people are preparing their children for the fact that their parents could be taken away at a heart's notice, and giving them, here's where you go, here's who you call, here's what happens if mommy or daddy doesn't come home or doesn't pick you up. It's just tragic.
Well, I can say that if that story that Jamal just shared makes somebody feel better about themselves, well, like, yeah, all right, little kid, go be scared, then I think you've lost a big piece of your soul if that's what it takes to make you feel good about yourself in life.
Yep.
That's the bottom line.
That's the bottom line. All right, we got more to come on this one. We'll keep watching it.